In this video, I just wanted to walk through an example of how and when to use the elimination or addition method when we're given a system of nonlinear equations. So in this case, we can see, if nothing else, that we have a 4x squared in the first equation, an x squared in the second equation, a y squared in the first equation, and a y squared in the second equation. The fact that we have like terms that we can line up between the two equations means that it might be a better idea to use the elimination or addition method. So Professor Messenger showed some good examples of how and when to use the substitution method, which is usually the most advantageous. But in this case, if I were to try to use the substitution method, trying to solve for one of these variables will be a little bit difficult because we would have a plus or minus square root in there that might get lost, or even one of our solutions might get lost. So whenever we can't use a substitution, or it's not in our best interest to use it, and when we can see that we can line up like terms, that's when we want to use the elimination method. So in this case, in order to use our elimination method, I'm going to want to try to figure out which variable to eliminate. If I try to add straight down, I can see that neither of my variables will eliminate, so that means I need to multiply one or both equations by some number so that I can eliminate a variable. I'm going to choose to eliminate y squared because I can see that I already have a y squared and a y squared, but again, you can choose to eliminate the x squared if you wish, which means that we're going to need to multiply one equation by -1. So I'm going to choose to multiply our second equation by -1. But you can most certainly multiply the first one if you wish. So our first equation is going to stay 4x squared plus y squared equals 13, and our second equation will become negative x squared minus y squared equals -10. So now I can use that addition or elimination method and add our like variables. So adding straight down, I have 4x squared minus x squared would be 3x squared. Y squared minus y squared will cancel out, that's the whole point, and then 13 minus 10 would end up being 3. So right now I have an equation that will be a lot easier to solve. I have 3x squared equals 3. Our next step then would be to just solve whatever variable we have left, which in my case would be the 3x squared equals 3. So I want to solve that for x. So getting our x by itself, dividing both sides by 3, we would have x squared is equal to 1. From here, we would take the square root of both sides, and then remember that means we have x equals plus or minus the square root of 1. Well, really then square root of 1 is 1, so you'd have x equals to plus or minus 1. So we do have two answers, because then our next step would be to solve for our remaining variable, which in my case would be y, and I would have to do that twice. I'm going to need to do that for x equals to positive 1, and then we're going to need to do it for x equals to -1. So I'm going to plug into the first equation that we did not change. Either way, you would need to go back to one of the original equations, so then that way we could ensure that we're substituting correctly. So I'm going to go back to the first one, plugging in x equals 1, we would have 4 times 1 squared plus y squared equals 13. So 4 times 1 squared is 1, times 4 is going to be 4. So 4 plus y squared equals 13. Moving the 4 over, we would have y squared equals 9. Again, taking the square root of both sides, we're going to have y equals plus or minus 3. So that means when x equals 1, I actually have two answers. So I'm going to get two ordered pairs. I'm going to get one positive 3, and I'm going to get one negative 3. So x equals 1 yielded two answers. Follow the same process for x equals -1. I would have 4 times -1 squared plus y squared equals 13. Well, -1 squared is positive 1 times 4 is going to stay 4. So from this point on, it's actually going to be exactly the same as what we just did for our positive 1. So we would have y squared equals 9. Taking the square root of both sides, we actually get the same answer. But again, from x equals -1, we got y equals plus or minus 3. So that's two answers. So I'm going to have two ordered pairs. I have -1, positive 3, and -1, -3, which means that we have 4 answers total. So just be sure that you remember the plus or minus in each case to obtain all 4 solutions.